If you took a monarch who possessed every conceivable luxury and placed them next to a monk who owned nothing, who would be happier? This story begins with a remarkably wealthy man who, as he aged, noticed a difficult truth. His money offered no protection against the physical decay of getting older. Seeing that his status was ultimately useless against time, he gave up his fortune, left his social position behind, and retreated into the forest to live entirely without possessions. He spent his days practicing meditation, training his mind to let go of unwholesome thoughts, and replacing ambition with a deep, quiet contentment. That kind of genuine peace is rare, and it tends to attract people. Over time, his quiet friendliness drew a community of 500 followers who wanted to learn from his example. He had effectively traded a fortune that could be lost or stolen for a state of mind that couldn't be taken away from him. Life in the forest was disciplined, and most of these monks carried a very serious, solemn demeanor. But there was one exception, a dignified monk who constantly wore a warm, subtle smile. This image illustrates the monks walking through the trees. Even as part of a large, austere community, this particular monk never seemed to lose a glimmer of inner joy. When people asked him why he was always so happy, he would just chuckle. He told them that if he explained it, they wouldn't believe him, and he didn't want their disbelief to reflect poorly on his teacher. The old master, however, understood exactly where this joy came from. Recognizing the depth of the smiling monk's realization, he made him his primary assistant. It is a strange sight, a person who has voluntarily given up food, comfort, and status, becoming the happiest individual in a group of 500. His joy wasn't tied to a specific celebration or a sudden stroke of good luck. It was a permanent internal state, persisting regardless of what was happening around him. Eventually, the rainy season ended, and the old master led his followers into the city. The local king welcomed them and offered his royal pleasure garden as a place to stay for the spring. This king was a good ruler who took the welfare of his people seriously and worked hard to protect their prosperity. But that responsibility came at a heavy cost. He was constantly managing threats from unfriendly neighboring kingdoms, mediating disputes between rival ministers, dealing with family infighting, and facing threats to his own life. He was so consumed by the mechanics of keeping his kingdom safe and financially stable that he had no time left over to actually enjoy his own life. As summer approached and the monks prepared to leave, the king noticed the old master was becoming frail. He requested that the elderly teacher stay behind in the city, while the rest of the community returned to the woods. The king had wealth and palaces, but his position required him to act as a permanent manager of crises, locking him into a cycle of unending stress. Back in the forest, the smiling assistant took charge of the remaining monks. Immersed in meditation, his sense of peace deepening even further, and he soon traveled back to the city to visit his old master. When he arrived, he sat quietly by his teacher's feet. Every few moments, breaking the silence, he would simply say out loud, "What happiness! Oh, what happiness!" During this visit, the king stopped by to pay his respects, but the assistant didn't stand up, didn't offer a greeting, and just kept repeating his joyful phrase. The king was insulted. Exhausted from running a country, he assumed this monk was simply being lazy, perhaps groggy and stupid from overeating. Through the lens of his own exhaustion and ego, the king couldn't recognize genuine contentment. He could only view the monk's lack of formal respect as a personal attack. Sensing the tension, the old head monk intervened. He told the king that very few people knew the real source of this assistant's joy. The smiling monk used to be a monarch, with exactly the same wealth and power as the king standing before them. In his past life, he required armed men to guard him around the clock, and yet he still lived in constant fear. Now, sitting alone in the middle of the woods, he had nothing to be afraid of. Because he had let go of the wealth that required protecting, he no longer needed soldiers. His mind was clear, and his wisdom offered a more effective defense against anxiety than any army ever could. He wasn't happy because he had acquired something new. He was happy because he no longer had anything left to defend. Hearing this history, the king's anger vanished. In its place was a sense of peace, and a desire to stay and receive advice from the two monks. Eventually, the former king returned to his life in the forest. The old master lived out his final days in the city, dying peacefully and, according to the story, being reborn in a higher realm. The texts tell us that this story was recounted by the Buddha himself, revealing that he was the wise old master in a past life, and the joyful former king was his trusted elder, Bhatia. Unattached to wealth and power, a person's happiness begins to increase. The ultimate security isn't found behind palace walls or rows of guards. It exists entirely within a mind that has finally stopped fearing what it might lose.